Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really mission-critical question for anyone involved in global development or ministry. What if we've been fundamentally measuring success wrong for decades?
It's a big question,
Hmm.
and it points towards, a potential paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Traditionally, success in mission work, ministry work, it's often measured by, external inputs.
Right, like how much money went in, how many people were sent out.
Exactly. How much was funded, how many foreign staff were deployed, or
Mhm.
just the sheer number of churches planted.
Yeah.
But that tally, well, it often ignores the long-term durability, doesn't it?
It really does. And our stack of sources today challenges this deeply. They're pushing the boundaries on what successful impact truly looks like. The metric, they argue, shouldn't be how much is planted or funded from the outside, but rather how many local initiatives can actually stand on their own feet, send out their own people, and multiply entirely independently.
That's the core idea.
So this deep dive is really about understanding the strategy needed for, well, genuine autonomy and dignity.
Yeah, we are diving into what these sources call the mature seed vision. And alongside that, the concrete strategies needed to move mission efforts well beyond dependency. The goal is pretty ambitious: to provide you, the listener, with a clearer roadmap for cultivating movements that are truly, how did they put it, biblically grounded, culturally authentic, and globally transformative.
Okay, so our mission here is to move past just an initial planting stage and to really focus on the theological steps, yes, but also the very practical steps required for confident entrustment.
Entrustment, that's the key word.
It is. This is about that critical shift, which I imagine is often quite painful. The shift from being the founder, the one in charge, to simply being the facilitator, and moving from perpetually pouring resources into just maintenance
Keeping things alive.
to actually training the locals for exponential multiplication.
And to really appreciate the scale of this shift, we first need to define the core problem properly: dependency. In missions, dependency isn't just, say, a lack of funds.
It's deeper than that.
Oh, much deeper. It's a systemic weakness. It's where churches simply cannot meet their own needs, whether that's leadership or theological clarity or finances, without constant outside help. Help in the form of outside staff, external funds, or, crucially, foreign directives.
You know, that sounds like it could start as a noble attempt to provide support. But what you're saying, and what the sources imply, is that this support can actually end up choking local agency.
It absolutely can. Dependency profoundly constrains that contextual leadership. It undermines the local church's ability to send out its own people. What's fascinating, though, is the tension behind it, the desire to maintain control. The source material notes that this impulse often wears the costume of care.
That phrase, where's costume of care, that's powerful. I can totally see that. Founding missionaries, they genuinely want to protect doctrinal integrity, right? Ensure funds aren't misused, maintain certain standards.
Of course, the intentions are often good.
But if the intent is care, what's the actual harm?
The harm is structural. That's the key point. While the intent might be protection, the documents argue this protection calcifies. It hardens into systems that actively limit local initiative. And the result? Fragile congregations.
How?
Fragile because when foreign funds pay the bills, the local leaders often feel, consciously or not, that they must follow foreign directives. Even if those directives don't quite fit the culture, they become, as you hinted earlier, like perpetual seedlings. They can't really weather a storm or reproduce without that external watering system always being on.
And leaders, they must be able to spot these structural flaws early on because, well, if you don't track it, you can't change it. The sources actually give specific, measurable signals of dependency. Let's get into that data.
Yeah, we have to get specific here. The sources highlight two big red flags that organizations, perhaps unintentionally, often ignore. First, key leadership positions are still held only by expatriates years after the initial planting.
Years later.
Yes. If you don't have local ownership of the pulpit and the administration, you don't really have a local church. You just have an extension office.
That's a stark way to put it. An extension office. And the second warning sign is the financial one, right? Which is maybe the easiest to quantify, but often the hardest one to change.
Yeah, absolutely. The second major red flag is a budget where more than, say, 70% comes from outside sources.
Yeah.
And crucially, there's no explicit actionable plan already in place to change that structure by the third year of operation.
70%, with no plan to shift it by year 3.
Exactly. If that plan isn't written down, owned by the local leaders, discussed regularly, You are basically guaranteeing long-term reliance.
Wow, that 70% figure is a hard dose of reality, isn't it? So the ultimate measure of failure, then, it seems, is confusing your presence with possession.
That's a great way to phrase it.
It's when the founding organization confuses its temporary involvement with permanent ownership. The highest achievement for a missionary, these documents assert, isn't permanence. It's not staying forever. It's the confidence to actually execute the handoff, to be able to genuinely say, I have taught, I have equipped, now go.
And that realization, that handoff mentality, that's really the cornerstone of this mature seed vision we mentioned.
Yeah.
This vision calls for, well, a radical rethinking of strategy.
Yeah.
It demands we shift our resources, our attention, our energy from just maintenance mode, just keeping the lights on,
Right.
to multiplication mode, which focuses entirely on training people to reproduce new leaders, new fellowships, and doing it quickly and sustainably.
This feels less like just another strategic plan and maybe more like a fundamental operating mandate.
Right.
And our sources point directly to a biblical blueprint for this kind of reproduction. They cite Paul in 2 Timothy 2.2.
The classic text.
What you have heard from me,
Mhm.
entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. That mandate seems to define the gospel's own operating system. You teach, you entrust, and then you release.
Precisely. And for a long time, missional efforts relied on that classic three-self principle.
Self-governing, self-supporting, self-propagating.
Exactly. Those are essential foundations, no doubt. But the sources we looked at, and frankly, many modern missiologists strongly urge adding a necessary fourth element. And this one is perhaps the most critical for cultural longevity. Self-theologizing.
Self-theologizing. Okay, can you define that for us? Because honestly, that sounds like something that could easily slip into cultural relativism if it's not handled very carefully.
That's a fair concern, and it needs careful handling. But what it means here is that local leaders must learn not only what the core doctrine is, but how to articulate it effectively, faithfully, within their own cultural categories, while obviously staying completely faithful to the gospel essentials.
So it's about owning the faith completely, from the inside out.
Yes. For example, instead of, say, simply repeating a Western hymn's concept of redemption verbatim, a self-theologizing leader learns how to communicate that same biblical truth using local songs, maybe local cultural stories, or even the traditional literary structures of their own region.
Okay, so it's not just translating the words, it's translating the meaning, the resonance, the relevance deep into the cultural soul of that community, that process. I imagine that's the only way to ensure the faith truly survives and thrives long after the original foreign mission has gone home.
It creates resilience, it creates authenticity, and crucially, it creates genuine ownership.
Okay, let's take this theological vision and start turning it into that practical roadmap you promised earlier. If we really want to move from dependency to multiplication, the first pillar has got to be leadership development. And the criteria here seem absolutely key. The sources detail a crucial shift in how we even identify leaders, prioritizing character before competence.
Yes. This is presented as basically non-negotiable. Leadership candidates, they argue, must be identified first based on things like moral integrity, spiritual maturity, relational wisdom.
Things that take time to see.
Exactly. These are qualities that require time and often stress to really test and prove. The sources are quite blunt. They argue character failure is the #1 cause of implosion in new ministries, far more than funding issues.
Okay, so you find the wise, tested person first. Then what about the skills? I mean, don't you need administrative competence to run what might become a complex organization?
Oh, of course you do. You absolutely need competence. But the argument is that competence, things like administrative skill, technical know-how, budget management, that stuff is cultivated after the character foundation has been established and proven solid.
Why after?
Because if that character foundation is weak, teaching competence simply gives a morally fragile person more power, more tools to fail spectacularly and take others down with them.
That makes sense. And the training model itself has to reflect this priority then, right? Moving away from maybe formal multi-year certificates or expensive seminary structures.
Which are often not reproducible locally anyway.
Right, away from those towards something else.
Exactly. The training model emphasized in these documents is apprenticeship over certificate. We're talking about using light, reproducible, often short training cycles, maybe 12-week or 6-month plans, where emerging leaders are immediately put into real ministry situations, but with measured, increasing responsibility, mentored closely. The source material states it pretty pointedly. The best seminar is the marketplace.
The best seminar is the marketplace. That implies a potentially riskier model, though, doesn't it? When you use the marketplace, the real world, as the seminar, you're trusting the apprentice to learn and, well, probably fail sometimes, often publicly. What's the trade-off? Why take that risk?
The trade-off, the benefit, is the creation of confident, resilient, and truly reproducible leaders. See, formal training often creates leaders who might excel in theory in the classroom.
But struggle in practice.
Right. Because they haven't really been tested under pressure. The apprenticeship model focuses on simple, replicable teaching cycles, like learn how to teach this one specific biblical book well. Then immediately turn around and use that skill to teach someone else. It forces multiplication, not just consumption of information.
That clarity really helps.
No.
Okay, let's move to that second big pillar, structural and financial release. If the goal is genuine self-support, financially speaking, you can't just wait until year 10 and then suddenly decide you need to leave. You need a proactive strategy right from the start for the handover.
Absolutely. And this is where the release covenant becomes the core practical tool. The sources describe this not as some kind of threat or an ultimatum, but as a simple, maybe one-page template. It's designed for a planned, phased transfer of responsibility and ownership. It explicitly details ownership benchmarks and, crucially, a firm timeline for the transition. And it's mutually agreed upon by both the local and the foreign partners.
The beauty of calling it a covenant, I suppose, is that it makes that potentially uncomfortable exit conversation just standard operating procedure from day one.
That's the idea. It normalizes the transition.
So what do those concrete benchmarks actually look like? You mentioned specifics earlier.
They are challenging, no doubt, but designed to be essential drivers of change. The covenant should typically mandate that local giving must rise to at least 25% of the operational budget by, say, year 1 or year 2.
25% year 1 or 2. Okay.
And then, critically, local leadership should be covering at least 60% of all operational costs by year 2 or year 3.
60% by year 3. Wow.
These are presented as minimum thresholds. They force local stewardship, local creativity, right from the beginning.
60% in 3 years. That sounds like a really steep climb, especially in areas that might be economically challenged. How do organizations actually move beyond just relying on the weekly collection plate to hit targets like that?
Yeah, and that's where innovation has to come in. It's not just about stopping the external funds cold turkey. It's about actively building local capacity. The sources highlight 2 key strategies here. The first is something they call skills-based stewardship.
Okay, tell us more about skills-based stewardship. What does that entail?
This is about mobilizing the professional skills already present within the local membership and treating those skills as financial offerings, even if they aren't actual cash.
How does that work in practice?
Okay, so let's say the ministry needs new accounting software setup, or maybe some basic financial oversight. Instead of paying a foreign consultant or relying on a foreign grant for that, you identify the local accountant who's already part of the congregation. They donate their professional time setting up the books, training someone as their stewardship, their contribution.
Ah, I see. Or if you need a website designed.
Exactly. The local graphic designer contributes that design work as their gift to the ministry's budget, effectively.
So instead of demanding cash the community might genuinely not have in abundance, you're leveraging resources. They do possess professional expertise, time, skills. That immediately gives local members real agency and ownership over the ministry's infrastructure, doesn't it?
Precisely. It values what people have, not just what they lack. And the second strategy related to this is piloting micro-enterprises.
Microenterprises, so small businesses.
Yeah, small scale.
Right.
These aren't meant to become, corporate giants. They're intended as small, diversified income streams that directly link the mission to the local economic health. Think of small ventures, like maybe a community bakery or a tutoring service run out of the church building, perhaps a small computer repair shop run by local members of the fellowship.
And the idea is these build self-sustaining systems that can feed back into the church budget while also employing people and serving the community needs, which reduces that reliance on, well, fickle foreign currency flows and donations.
It creates a kind of symbiotic relationship. When the local economy sees some benefit, however small, the local mission budget can also benefit, and the whole system becomes more resilient, more grounded. This is really the ultimate goal of that financial pillar, integrated sustainability.
Okay. So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive? We've journeyed through this idea that the path to a truly thriving, enduring ministry.
Well, it seems deeply rooted in dignity, in trust, and ultimately in the courage to release control, You have to move from being the gardener, the one constantly tending that fragile seedling with external resources,
Always watering.
to being more like the guide,
Yeah.
confident in the seed's inherent God-given capacity to grow strong and multiply all on its own.
The shift required, it's immense. It really is. And the sources strongly suggest something quite provocative, that the
Missional.
difference between a perpetually dependent ministry and truly globally transformative movement often wasn't better theology, surprisingly, or even a larger initial funding pool.
Mhm.
Often the key difference was trust.
Trust in the local leader's character, once identified. Trust in the local community's capacity. And maybe fundamentally, trust in the gospel's power to take root and flourish without needing permanent foreign structural scaffolding.
So here's the challenge for you then. If your mission success is truly measured by multiplied leaders rather than just sustained external presence, what one structural or financial control, maybe it's related to that release covenant idea or those leadership roles or that 70% budget metric we talked about, what one thing must you intentionally examine and maybe even plan to release this week? How can you demonstrate that trust? Think about the dignity that release could bring to your local partners.
That really is the challenge of true entrustment, and ultimately the definition of a mature seed.
We really hope this deep dive helps you think about moving your own efforts wherever you are, from just maintenance to genuine, lasting multiplication. We'll see you next time.